All right, today we're going to be doing a mid-range Intel build. I'm going to start off with a Core i7-12700K, 16 gigs of 5000 megahertz DDR4 memory, a 1 terabyte SSD, a gigabyte RTX 3060, a Corsair H150i Elite Capellix, an Asus Prime Z690P, a Corsair RM750 power supply, and a Corsair 4000D for the case. We're going to flip the case over. After we have the case flipped over, we're going to go ahead and install the power supply. Just makes it a little bit easier moving it around so you know where your cables are going to go. Going forward, I typically recommend installing the power supply last and just running the cables as long as you have a modular power supply. It makes it easier so you're not dealing with this heavy weight when you're moving the case around. We're going to actually remove the two fans that come pre-installed in the case. We will reuse them later, so we're not going to throw them out or anything. But we need to make sure we remove the front fans, the front panel from the case to make installing the all-in-one radiator that we're going to do a little bit later a little bit easier. And after that, we're going to go ahead and get the motherboard installed. One thing to remember is when you're installing the motherboard, make sure if it has an IO shield on the back, you get that IO shield installed first so you don't have to take the motherboard out at a later point. And to check the case to remove any standoffs that are in the case that you might not be using. Last thing you want to do is get the motherboard installed, go to power it on, and either you get sparks, a fire, or the magic blue smoke because the case itself is grounding out the motherboard. All right, after we have the motherboard in, next thing is going to go in is we're going to go ahead and install the CPU. Make sure you don't remove the plastic cover from the CPU socket until you actually put the CPU in there. There's a lot of delicate pins underneath there, and you want to make sure that you're keeping them as protected as you can as long as possible. All right, and then after we have the CPU installed, we're going to go ahead and install the SSD into the motherboard. So once you remove the actual SSD heat shield, make sure that you pull off the little blue piece of tape. It's the last thing I do here that's covering the thermal pads. That has to be removed. Most of the time they say remove on them, but people sometimes forget they're there. When you're going to install this, if there is not already a screw in the standoff for the NVMe M.2, then look in the motherboard box. There's usually a screw for it there. Or if you're lucky, you have a higher end motherboard and it has a little swivel to hold it in place. And you'll know what that is when you see it. So just make sure you get that in there. Make sure it's nice and secure, and make sure that tape is 100% off of there. All right, next we're going to go ahead and assemble our CPU cooler. This is a 3-fan design, so if you do end up getting one of these, verify that the case that you're putting it in supports it. A lot of situations, cases will look like they'll support 3 fans. In actuality, they will only support 2. So before you go ahead and splurge and get one of these guys and try and shove it in your case, verify that it actually will fit. The layout that I like for the all-in-one coolers is a pull-through design, so that you are pulling air across the radiator through the fans and into the case. The big reason I like this is it's much more difficult for dust to build up in between the fans and the actual radiator, and it makes it easier to clean the front of the radiator. So this cooling setup only works if you have the radiator at the front of your case. So that way you're pulling cool air directly from outside across the radiator into the case. If you had this at the top of the case, you'd want to flip all these fans over so that you're evacuating the hot air from inside the case out. It's a little less efficient for cooling, but there are some cases where that's the only option. After we have all the fans mounted to the radiator, we go ahead and get it attached to the case. When you're attaching this to the front of the case, make sure that you're using the screws that are provided by the radiator manufacturer, as well as the washers for each individual screw, so you don't pull through. Some cases, the metal on the front is extremely thin, and you can just straight up rip those screws right through the case, which would be a bad time for everyone. So next we're going to go ahead and install the bracket for the CPU cooler. We want to make sure that we have it sized correctly so we don't run into a situation where you're going to put it in and it's not sitting flush against the back of the motherboard. Just look at the actual bracket itself. Sometimes there's a notch cut out in them that indicates that it has to go a certain way, and just make sure you're putting it in there right. All right, now we're going to put those fans that we took out earlier back in the case. We're going to make sure that these are both exhausting so that all of the air that's being pulled across the radiator from the front of the case gets channeled through the case effectively and then out the top and out the back. That'll get rid of any additional ambient heat as well to keep airflow moving quite well. After that, we're going to go ahead and get the memory installed. There's only one way that it can go in, so make sure once you have it lined up, you have the notch lined up correctly with the actual sockets. Make sure it's snapped down all the way. A lot of times I have customers that'll come in with their own builds and they were afraid to put enough pressure on them. Unless you're really, really wrong, like, you're going to know. And just make sure that the clips on both sides actually got clipped all the way into the memory. All right, while we're here, we're going to take a moment to get the Corsair Commander installed. We want to find a nice, relatively secure place for this. It doesn't have any moving components. so you don't have to have it super hard mounted to anything if you don't have the space for it. But what you want to do is you want to get it attached in a location where it's pretty centrally located, where all of the individual cables from the fans and the actual RGB lines, if you have anything else, can easily get to it and can be cable managed effectively. All right, after we have that Commander Pro installed, we're gonna go ahead and do cable management and make sure you use plenty of zip ties. A note about cable management: you never want to have the cables too tight. What can happen is if you're moving around the case for some reason, or if you're moving around individual cables in the back, you don't want to put pressure points that can lead to either the cables getting cut, cables bending it too sharp of an angle and actually damaging the cables themselves. So just make sure you leave individual slack points in between each of the places you're going to put zip ties. Also, the backs of the cases, as long as the case is relatively new, it'll have places for cable management. So make sure you're using those little hoops. They're nice, they're solid, and that's what they're designed for. Finally, the last major component that we're going to go ahead and install is the video card. It's by far the largest individual component you're going to find in the case, especially with the way that video card sizing is going. So keeping this to the last possible moment to install just makes it easier to move around the case. Finally, after we have the video card installed and all situated, now we're gonna finally attach the CPU cooler to the motherboard, get it torqued down. What you want to do is you want to make sure this is tightened down to the point where all of the screws stop spinning. The coolers themselves are designed to only be tightened down so much, so it's difficult to over tighten. I'm not saying that you can't, but just get them down nice and secure. You don't want to have any wiggling on that CPU. It needs to make good contact so that you're quite effectively pulling the heat off of the CPU die. And there we have it. We are powered up. We have some RGB-ness going on here. We're going to get Windows installed, run some benchmarks to make sure everything is kosher with the PC, and then get it boxed up and off to the customer. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more awesome content. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest uploads. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave a comment down below. And don't forget to catch us live on Twitch Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5. Until next time, thanks for watching.